Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History by podcast. And today I'm joined by Professor Loren Stuckenbruck. And today's discussion is based on his book titled The Myth of Rebellious Angels. The link to purchase the book will be in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment. And that being said, Loren, thank you for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me once again. So what I'd like to start us off with is when we look at angels, we look at angels in Judaism, we look at angels in Christianity, and not just in the Bible, but also in apocryphal literature, pseudepigrapha. I want to start us off with asking about specifically how are the angels depicted? I mean, described. Usually, they're described as, or they're thought of to be as beings with wings, humanoid beings with wings, but their description is actually far different from that in some texts. Sometimes they're described as massive beings with wings that could darken the sky, block the sun from hitting the earth, or something like that. What do we know about those different descriptions?
Well, that's a very good question because the appearance of angels has often been the subject of speculation. And I don't mean speculation in the sense that people sit back and just try to imagine what they're like, but a lot of the literature that comes down to us that refers to angels do so by depicting visions that people have had or dreams. So it's kind of the stuff of the mystical. And in this, the descriptions of angels are meant to match something that is of the divine and of the divine world. And so, very often, the descriptions of angels in ancient texts vary significantly. Sometimes they go back to biblical tradition, like Daniel chapter 10, for example. And they pick up on, motifs that tend to trample around from vision to vision. But angels can be depicted in such a large number of ways. And looking at it chronologically, I think we see a shift from the ancient world, let's call it the biblical world, until the end of the first century and even later. Angels are basically gendered, and they're gendered as males and male figures. But as many of us know, and maybe many in the listening here, when we look at medieval paintings and paintings that sometimes go beyond that time, there are some that represent angels as almost effeminate beings, neither quite male, looking somewhat like a female. And I really think that is very foreign to the ancient biblical world, in which the angels were very much depicted as male beings. So whatever other motifs were attached to how they look, of central uh, 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 central to the tradition was that these are male, and that raises, of course, some very interesting questions when it comes to what angels do in some of our biblical texts.
When we go outside of biblical texts, like with the Enochic literature, how do things change there? How does the Enochic literature and other literature, like the Book of the Giants, uh, talk about angels differently from the way the Bible does?
Right. Well, that's very interesting. There is a bit of a shift in the sense that there is more interest in naming angels and giving them names. The only texts in the Hebrew Bible that actually do that are, or actually just is, the book of Daniel. Beyond that, we don't really have further angels' names until we get to the New Testament within the 66 books of the Protestant canon. In the book of Tobit, we have Raphael, but who is one of 7 angels who bring the prayers of people to God. And but then, as you are asking, in Enoch, we have quite a number of names, more names for bad angels than we do for the good ones. But even for the good ones, there are more names. One of the problems is that the Enochic literature is only fragmentary preserved in the ancient texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated from the beginning of the 2nd century BCE until the end of the 1st century BCE. And the fullest version that we have to these texts of the early Enoch literature, which we call 1 Enoch, occurs in the Ethiopic tradition. Now, in the Ethiopic tradition, we have of varying names of angels, of good angels. So that would be Michael, Gabriel, Sariel, Phanuel, and then variations of these that recur in the texts. So we have a little bit more there. What shifts, of course, is that we have a whole list of angels who are said to have rebelled against God in heaven, and their names are listed. In most of the texts, they are 19 or 20 by name at the end of chapter 6 of 1 Enoch. But the text says there are 20 who each are leaders of 10. So 20 times 10 is 200 angels who rebelled against God and fell in love with the daughters of humanity and then came down to produce offspring. In a later part of 1st Enoch, chapter 69, which is part of the book of parables, we have another list of some 20 angels' names who are bad, plus then a few others who are blamed for having caused problems in the world in one way or another. So the names of bad angels abound. We don't have any of this in the Hebrew Bible. We hardly have any of this in the New Testament, unless one wants to talk about Satan, Beelzebul, perhaps. We have the devil, we have the snake or a dragon in the book of Revelation, but proper names of the sorts that we find in the 1 Enoch literature are just not there.
When was first Enoch written?
Well, that's a favorite question that I like to think about. 1 Enoch is not a single book. It is a collection of books. And as a collection of books, it consists of what I would call 21, at least originally independently written traditions, which were composed between the 3rd century BCE and the very end of the 1st century CE, after Christ. So we're talking about a 400-year period. And so it's very different to talk about 1 Enoch in the same way as one talks about the book of Tobit or the Gospel of Matthew, or books that we can talk about having been written more or less within a closed period of time, or one of Paul's letters. 1 Enoch, as I've said, 21 perhaps individually, initially independent traditions, which then in the Ethiopian tradition becomes 5 books 5 main books plus 2 appendices, which each consist of other traditions that were then brought together. So it's really quite amazing. The Book of Enoch was composed, much of it, in the centuries leading up to the turn of the Common Era, to the time of Jesus, and continued growing as a tradition during the 1st century BCE, alongside the growth of early Christian writings. So there's lots in there to compare with the New Testament. And we can say that certainly that tradition was alive and well. And even if it's not quoted as much as other early Jewish traditions in the New Testament, there are so many motifs in it that resonate with developments we see in the early Christian movement.
What happens with Enoch in first and second Enoch? I- are these texts trying to elaborate on on Enoch's experience after his ascension described in the book of Genesis?
Very interesting. I think that perhaps the inception or the beginning of the Enochic tradition may go back to an interpretation of what we find in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. And where Enoch himself is not mentioned, but just after a reference to the birth of Enoch and his having walked with God, with Elohim, a term for God which could also be a plural reference to angelic beings, as we see already in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some scholars think that the Enochic tradition is presupposed by Genesis 5 and 6 rather than depends on it. But I'm still of the opinion that it is harder to explain this way of tradition developing than to find the many details that we meet up with in the Book of Watchers, which are not found in Genesis. And I would have a hard time imagining that those details would be left out in order to create the Genesis text than the other way around. So Enoch, there was something special, obviously, about this figure. He walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Early Jewish literature debates whether God taking him was a reference to his death or whether he just never died but ascended. The early Enochic texts assume the latter, that God took him, he went up. And since he didn't die, there is, of course, a question of where is he and what does he see? The texts of 1 Enoch try, however, to work some of the traditions into an imagined biography of Enoch. So the Book of Dreams, for example, is given to him just before he took Edna as his wife. And so it had to have been rather than after he ascended, as those traditions imagine the time that they took place. But I think others, which imagine that Enoch was hidden from humanity, could assume that he had already ascended, or that he ascended initially when he walked with God and then came back to communicate his visions and revelation to his son Methuselah. So we have a number of parts of 1 Enoch in which Enoch is communicating his visionary experiences and what he has seen to Methuselah. And at the beginning of the Epistle of Enoch, in chapter 91, he's not only communicating to Methuselah, his son, but also to the family who follow him. So the early Enochic traditions, not always in the same way, are imagining a biography of Enoch that uh, could make sense of what we find in Genesis, but they go well beyond that and allow Enoch to have seen very, very many things, which then in turn are given to his sons, which in turn must have survived the flood in some way and are uh, uh, preserved and transmitted for later times.
Barnes Web 52, thank you for becoming a member. Appreciate it. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your super chat. What's going on with the angels getting mad because their names were spoken out loud from the Zohar? If you're not holy enough, they will make you insane and have to be put in a psychiatric ward. Saw a rabbi saying this.
Okay, that's a reference, of course, to the much later Jewish mystical traditions that we have from the 12th, 13th, 14th, and later centuries, in which a great deal of speculation grows and develops in relation to angelic beings as well as in relation to the figure of God. This is a far, far afield from the kind of things that we see in the early Enochic tradition. And I'm not an expert in the Jewish mystical side of things, which Gershom Scholem and Moshe Idel and many others have written extensively about. But one could say that some of this is an extension of the impulses that we already begin to see in early Jewish apocalyptic literature.
What does the book of Jubilees say about the angels?
This is good. The book of Jubilees also refers to an angelic rebellion, but it's different. Whereas in the Book of Watchers, which is the first part of 1 Enoch, the angels are in heaven, look down upon the beauty of women and fall in love with them, and then take an oath to go down and to sire offspring through them. In Jubilees, the angels who rebel are initially sent by God to the earth on a kind of mission to teach humanity, presumably good things. And it's once they are down on earth that then they get distracted by the beauty of the women. And that's where the rebellion takes place. They are not given names. What we have is several names or descriptions of a being at the very top who is most often referred to as Mastema, a couple of times also Satan. And Mastema is the one who negotiates with God the status of the beings that are part of it. There's more focus on the evil spirits rather than on the whole range of angels who rebel, referred to in mostly chapter 5 and then through 10 of the Book of Jubilees. The interest is on the evil spirits, which emerge from the bodies of the giants, who are the offspring of the angels and the women. The offspring are then killed, presumably in body, and it's their spirits that survive. And because humanity has survived the flood intact, and they haven't, but have their spirits, they are prone to attack humans. And especially in the Enochic tradition, we have this developed a little bit further in chapter 15, suggesting that the evil spirits are especially prone to attack humans, um, uh, in a way to get back at the kind of existence that they once had. This has huge ramifications for how we read then the Gospels, but that's not yet your question.
Well, let's take us to the let's get to the Gospels then. Could you expand on what the ramifications are in regards to the Gospels?
Certainly. What is fascinating about the passages in which Jesus is said to exorcise demonic beings, evil spirits, unclean spirits from people, is that they are rarely destroyed. They are simply removed. And that's important. I think when I grew up, I always thought when Jesus was exorcising them, he was basically killing these evil spirits or removing them from having any influence, further influence on people. But that's clearly not the case. And this is something that really connects up very neatly with what meets us in the early Enochic tradition. Namely, once the rebellious angels and the women mate, their offspring is half angel and half human. And when their bodies are killed, whether they're killing each other, which is also in Enoch, or they're killed by the flood, their spirits live on. And they are especially interested in attacking um, uh, people, as I've said, but more than that, to enter their bodies kind of as a way to reclaim the existence they once had. So, what we have in the Gospels is an almost stable or consistent language referring to these spirits or spirits as entering into bodies, not just attacking from the outside, but entering into bodies so that when Jesus is engaged in exorcism, or anyone else, the unnamed exorcist, or even his disciples and others, they are kicking them out, taking them out. The Greek word is ekbalein. Eis erkomai is going in. That's what's referred to what the spirits do. And then the exorcisms involves them coming out of being within. There is no other literature that depicts this going in and having to be gotten out like that which we find in the Enochic tradition. More often, the references are to beings that attack, and it's a matter of warding off the evil spirits than it is to having them being taken out from the human being. So this is important. Why? Well, at the time of the flood, the killing or the death of the bodies of the offspring of the rebellious angels and the women are in effect defeated. They are defeated by God's judgment. The human souls cry out and complain, as well as the earth, because the giants have killed so many, they've destroyed a lot of what God has created. And it's the four archangels or archangels who take these complaints to God, and then God acts. God acts through flood. He acts to save Noah and his family. But these beings who have wreaked havoc in the pre-flood times are decisively judged. And even though their spirits then go on to live, they live on or exist further, though attacking people as defeated beings whose final destruction is just a matter of time. It's a matter of time, and it will take place at the very end. So the message in this respect of the early Enochic tradition is to say, you know, all these things that are wreaking havoc in your lives, whether it's they're using, the politics of the day as agents, or whether you're ill or suffering in some terrible way, these are all caused by beings who are already defeated. In other words, it's a matter of time before they will be completely destroyed. And it's up to the faithful to put their trust in God. And in the meantime, to employ temporary expedients like prayer. The Enochic tradition doesn't refer to this, but I'm thinking of the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. Prayer, liturgy, other means. Noah in the book of Jubilees is taught remedies to deal with sickness and to ward off the effects of evil spirits, which then exemplify or anticipate the final destruction that is to take place. Now we go to the Gospels. The demonic beings are aware somehow that their time has not yet come. This happens in the scene of the Gadarene demoniac, and certainly in the Matthean version in chapter 8. Invariably, though, in the Gospels, with one possible exception, the the demons are not destroyed, they're just simply removed. And then in Luke chapter 11, this famous little passage, Jesus refers to an exorcism that might have taken place. He doesn't refer to it as a specific event, and talks about a man having been ridden of a demon, which then the spirit of which goes out and looks for a place it can, reside again, and eventually brings back 7 more who are worse than himself, and they re-enter the man. So the exorcism is no guarantee that the problems have disappeared. This is an amazing passage because it admits, whether Jesus is behind such an exorcism or the disciples or anyone else, that the problems, however they are caused, and if they are caused by evil spirits or the demonic world, are um, are um, uh, are already are already defeated, but that they don't simply disappear. And that lends really the world of the Gospels a certain realism. These are not, Jesus isn't one that just simply causes everything to go away. What he offers is images of what will ultimately be, when God's restoration of the world order to what God wants it to be has then finally come about. So these are defeated powers, but they're not gone. And the Gospels seem to relay this way of looking at the world. And I would want to say that then Jesus' ministry is seen to participate in a very poignant way within this setting and can be seen as very much in continuity with the Jewish apocalyptic tradition in this respect. The one exception that I was referring to a moment ago might be the Gerasene demoniac in Mark chapter 5. As many here would know, the legion of demons in the demoniac beg to be sent into a herd. Jesus does this. They come out of the man. He sends them into the herd, and then the herd go down into the sea and they drown. And the Mark text reads in a way that it suggests that even the spirits that are part of the herd, that have entered the herd of pigs, die too. This may reflect perhaps part of the animal vision in which the giants are said to sink to the bottom, and there's no sense that they have survived. The Matthew, I'm sorry, Mark does not have the herd of pigs, the spirits and the herd of pigs die. It seems like they go on. It's the Matthean version that seems to go further and has them destroyed as well as the herd of pigs. It's how one reads the Greek at that point. But it's significant because I, for instance, as a child, grew up thinking that these were all miracles, and if they're miracles, then they are a matter of showing how God gets rid of problems, and that God is doing this in the ministry of Jesus. But reading the Gospels in conversation with the early Enochic tradition suggests that even though it is possible to take control of the demonic, at the same time, it doesn't mean that the demonic simply disappears.
DL Betty, thank you for your super chat. For angels that know Yahweh is all knowing and all powerful, what would they hope to gain from a rebellion?
Wow. Well, this is a wonderful comment, also question. The Enochic tradition does not really speculate about what they think they could get out of it, except to say that they are beguiled by the beauty of women that are part of what God has created in this order. And because, and going back to the beginning of our discussion, angels were understood to be male. This male side is simply made to explain why, or to give the motivation for why they rebelled, plus the male instinct to produce offspring. Beyond that, what do they have to gain? It seems like at the beginning in chapter 6 of 1 Enoch, they realize their leader, Shemichaza, knows that this is a terrible sin, and he's concerned that he's going to be left alone. So he wants the others to take an oath that they will not turn back from committing this sin. Um, so they know they're probably going to be in trouble. What's interesting, though, is that afterwards, after all is said and done and all the stuff they have done, they still hope that somehow they're going to get forgiveness or that they will receive mercy from God. And so the story goes on how they ask Enoch to petition on their behalf to God that they can have mercy when they realize there's probably no exit from being punished. And so Enoch then travels to the throne room of God. He's brought up there, and God gives him this message that says they will have no peace. Their judgment is certain, and they have no way out except to be punished and ultimately destroyed.
And what about third Enoch?
Okay, we call, one, two Enoch is the Slavonic Enoch, for which we only have materials, I would still argue, in Old Church Slavonic. And some of the traditions therein go back to a very early time. Third Enoch was also called a Hebrew Enoch. Hugh Odeberg was the first to publish this some time ago, 100 years ago. Third Enoch engages with the Enochic tradition, but takes it several stages further, in that there is an Enoch character, but this Enoch character is then fused with an angelic being. And there is also a Rabbi Ishmael, who is a part of the text, and eventually being fused into a being called Metatron. One way of understanding that word is meta, with, and tron being from tronos, throne, somehow related to the divine throne, as the narrative shows. And then Acher, one of the sages, comes up in one of his visions of the divine world at the top and sees that Metatron is actually sitting on a throne. And he declares that there are two powers in heaven. And then, as a result of this wrong statement, because there should only be one, an angel is sent to give Metatron a number of lashes to declare very clearly that Metatron is not to be confused with God whatsoever. This is a real development of the kinds of things that we hardly meet in the early Enoch tradition, with one exception. Namely, at the very end of the book of parables, Enoch is participating in the heavenly worship of the head of days, alongside myriads of angels and the four archangels. And then suddenly, or unexpectedly, it's either God, as some manuscripts would suggest, or it's the Archangel Michael, which most later manuscripts clearly say, come to Enoch and declare that you are the Son of Man. And then all of a sudden, this being, heavenly being that Enoch in the previous 30 some odd chapters has looked up to, acting on God's behalf and sitting on God's throne of glory, judging the kings, the owners of land, and other oppressors, is now told that he is the very being that he's been looking at. So there is, in this mystical worldview, a fusion that takes place between an earthly figure and someone who has been the object of a vision thus far. This is similar to a third Enoch, which then takes it to another level. It's fascinating because here we might have another interesting parallel to the gospel tradition. Jesus, of course, is the only one who refers to Son of Man in all four gospels. But in a number of the of the sayings of Jesus, he is not using Son of Man as a substitute for the relative pronoun, for the pronoun I, but he seems to be referring to the Son of Man really as in the third person, as one who is coming to judge and who will sit on the throne of glory, without saying explicitly that he is the Son of Man. But the readers and hearers of the gospel texts know and believe that Jesus is the Son of Man. So just as in the book of parables, Enoch is referring to the Son of Man, but then later finds out that he is the Son of Man, we have here references to the Son of Man attributed to Jesus, under the assumption, certainly amongst the readers and hearers of the text, that Jesus himself is to be identified with this Son of Man.
What do you make of Enoch, who becomes Metatron, in third Enoch being referred to as the lesser Yahweh?
Yes, there is that tradition. Um, it reflects an exaltation of this figure, one who is closely associated with God. I would not say that a lesser Yahweh here is meant to be a replacement for God at all, but it is a reflection of the earlier Jewish tradition that it is conceivable that there is a divine agent who acts on God's behalf, maybe subordinate to God, but acts on God's behalf in quite a number of ways. This has obviously been subject to a lot of debate because conceptually, this is thought to be a framework within which to understand the early developments in Christology of Jesus being one who is alongside God without really replacing God and God's self. Others have debated whether this figure is whether such a figure like a lesser Yahweh and so forth is one who could be worshipped or not worshipped. And Larry Hurtado, for example, and some others have argued that there is no cultic worship of such a figure, even though such a figure could be referred to in an ideal sense and with exalted language. Hurtado, for example, and some others emphasizing that whereas there is a cult that forms around the figure of Jesus, we don't see such a cult, that is, people meeting together in assemblies to around a figure within Jewish tradition who gains such prominence. I think these comparisons are a bit fuzzy. Life is never what we hope it to be or what we expect, and when we look closer at texts, we're always going to be surprised if we look closely and especially with an open mind. So the book of parables does refer to the Son of Man, and to the faithful who will rise and eat with the Son of Man. There's a sense of of belonging and connection between the faithful and the Son of Man, whether this is just way in the future or in the imminent future, what we call the eschaton, the end of the age, or whether in some sense this is already uh, anticipated in the present community receiving this writing.
And what about the Book of Tobit? Does it have? Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Book of Tobit is terrific. It does give another name for a bad angel, and or a demon named Asmodeus. Similar to the fallen angels, there's some jealousy, I think, at work, but for a very different reason. This woman, Sarah, has tried to be married to 7 husbands, or there was a marriage, but it was never consummated because Asmodeus would strangle each of those husbands. And as the story goes, the first protagonist, Tobit, gets blinded. He needs, but he wants to ensure that his son will have a proper inheritance. So he sends him out and finds Raphael. It's the name of an angel that means God heals, or God has healed. Whom he doesn't know is an angel, thinks is a cousin, who accompanies then his son, Tobias, on a journey where they find a fish and kill it, and the angel gives him a recipe on what to do with the different parts of the fish. With the one part, the gall, applied almost as medicine. In the old Greek tradition, it's called a pharmakon, to get rid of the blindness of the father Tobit, and the heart and the liver to be burned and smoked at the right time in order to drive a demon away. So at the time when Tobias is betrothed to Sarah, as it turns out, the angel instructs that he is to burn the heart and the liver, and that in doing so, just before the marriage is consummated, and before he and his wife pray to God for offspring and so forth, he does that, and Asmodeus is driven away. So there is a demonology component, very much in the Book of Tobit, but similar to even Jubilees and to the Book of Watchers. It's interesting that this Asmodeus, it's never claimed that this Asmodeus is destroyed. He's just driven away to the upper parts of Egypt. And who knows what happens to him there? Maybe he stays there forever. There are a couple of claims that, if in chapter 6, when Raphael is telling about the effects of smoking the heart and the liver, that when it's done, the demon will not ever touch the man or a woman again. So he may not be destroyed, but the claim is that this recipe will have a permanent effect. What a great story. It's full of humor. It's fun to read. I would recommend everyone to read it. Read it in the old version rather than the new. This new kind of sanitizes the texts, gets rid of the pharmakon and the medicine. I think the New Revised Standard Version tries to give us the old text, which is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, even though it's just in fragments.
Did the early Enochic traditions and other adjacent traditions influence the book of Revelation and the Gospels, descriptions about the angels or rebelling in Revelation and such?
Well, the only thing we can say is that the Enochic tradition has certainly influenced the worldview in which Jesus' ministry is presented. And it's not just that Jesus is participating in it, but they help us to place Jesus in a context, in a very realistic way. And actually, the Enochic tradition comes closest to the Gospels discourse about demons than any other literature that we have from ancient Judaism, which then is significant. As for the book of Revelation, while we're at it, there is a chapter in the myth of the rebellious angels in which I have addressed the question, and I drew in Mark Matthews, who had written a dissertation on riches and wealth in the book of Revelation, who had drawn a bit on the Epistle of Enoch. And so some of his work was then helpful in conducting that study. What surprised me in looking closely at the book of Revelation is that we have at least 50, I think well over 50, maybe 55 instances where Revelation and what we find in all parts of 1 Enoch share motifs or language. That's a lot, or symbols also. That's a lot. If we're looking specifically at possible influences of the Enochic tradition on Revelation, we can't go for this, let's say 55, because many of those motifs, or some of them, are also found in other ancient literature of Judaism. So one cannot then say, the occurrences of it here and in 1 Enoch is a matter of influence, because it seems to be an even broader context. For instance, just the mere reference to the Son of Man, or Jesus looking like the Son of Man in the book of Revelation, could go back to Daniel. It doesn't have to reflect what we have in the book of Parables, where the Son of Man is just so prominent. And we could say this about quite a number of things. Now, that being said, there are quite a number of instances, I'd say 18, if at my last count, instances in which we have a combination of motifs that are only found in Revelation and in 1 Enoch, or a combination of words and phrases that are only found in 1 Enoch and the book of Revelation. 18 times. It doesn't mean that Enoch influenced Revelation, but it does mean that there is almost a straight line between the two traditions. And I think that's significant, especially because the early apocalyptic literature, especially 1 Enoch, and it would be true of the book of Revelation, they make use of many traditions without ever formally citing them. In the book of Revelation, the closest we have to a quotation occurs in chapter 1, verse 7, 8, from Zechariah and the book of Daniel, but it's never introduced by "as the scripture says," or "as it says," or in some way that indicates what is being referred to is scripture, in quotes. The text just simply draws on terminology which is found in this particular tradition. Now, the book of Revelation doesn't ever quote a book, but it alludes to multiple symbols found in other books, and prominently so would be Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and so forth. And if we look at the way Revelation uses tradition, and then if we bring in one Enoch into the that pool of traditions on which Revelation draws, then there's really very little difference between the influence of one Enoch and the influence of many, many other books in the Hebrew Bible, which also can credibly be said to have influenced the text. So I have a trouble with studies that have a myopic focus on Revelation's use of the Old Testament, if that means the use of the traditions that we find in the 39 books of the Hebrew Bible. We know that Enoch was very significant alongside other traditions, but that in this particular case, Enoch really does weigh rather heavily. Even the sequence of eschatology, of the eschatological events at the end of time, from Revelation chapter 18 to 21, culminating in the New Jerusalem, corresponds very closely to the sequence of events that we find in the Apocalypse of Weeks of 1 Enoch, chapter 91, verses 12 to 16. It's really quite interesting. And also, Revelation chapter 14, which has a series of visions about angels acting on God's behalf to bring a judgment. There is a cluster of images. I think it's verses 9 to 20 that have parallels with the Epistle of Enoch, the book of parables, as well as the conclusion to the astronomical book. Very dense. And more than any other tradition, really in chapter 14 of Revelation, in this part, we have to do with the Enochic tradition as the main, I would even claim, conversation partner. So we have, quite a bit going on there, and if we are willing to admit something like this, then it's very difficult to say that one Enoch was less scripture for the book of Revelation than some other books of the Hebrew Bible to which Revelation alludes.
Just to come back to third Enoch real quick. When does third Enoch hit?
That's a good question. Hekalot Rabbati is kind of the tradition, which is also a diverse tradition. The manuscripts diverge quite a lot from one another. I think we're talking about a composition that flourishes at least in the 6th to the 8th centuries CE. Now, it's one thing to talk about the date of composition, and it's another to talk about the date of the traditions that it contains. And one can certainly imagine, due to the continuities between the end of the book of parables, I talked about earlier the fusion of figures that takes place within a context of heavenly worship. a visionary no longer is looking at what's going on, that visionary or seer becomes part of the whole deal, and then things start to happen that seem to be unexpected. This kind of dynamic that we find in Third Enoch must be a lot earlier. I could put it back to the first century um, as a possibility. But was it written down at that point as such? I don't think so. We have so much else in Third Enoch that reflects later mystical traditions, uh, to which we have, for which we have no evidence from the earlier period.
And in my final question, what would you say are some of the major differences between the way the angels are understood in Judaism versus out of Christianity?
Wow. Well, uh, I don't think there is a great difference, I would want to say. In terms of antiquity, I'd say there is very little difference. Um, one of the obvious differences that comes into play when we're thinking about ancient Christianity or the beginnings of Christianity is the possible demotion of the importance of angelic beings because of the growth of Christology in the first century. The book of Revelation, for example, and even Acts and others, especially though Revelation goes to great pains to say that angels, should not be worshipped. John falls at the feet of an angel not once, but twice in chapters 19 and 22, respectively, only to be told by the angel, don't worship me, worship God. And this is something that, of course, we find in some other ancient Jewish texts. But with the emergence of Christology, um, as, for example, we find at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, the emphasis seems to be you can throw yourself at the feet of Jesus and worship him, but you can't do it to the angel, namely at the tomb. The angel comes down to the tomb at the morning of the resurrection. The guards who are there fall as dead. What does the angel do? He tells the women, do not be afraid, but go on. And do not be afraid could mean don't be scared, or it could mean don't be afraid of me in the sense of being in awe of me. And so the women go and towards Galilee, and they meet Jesus on the way, and they fall at his feet and worship him. So it's really interesting. We have here a subtle demotion of this amazing angelic being, whose appearance makes the guards fall down as dead, along with the earthquake. And for the narrative then to throw the focus on Jesus himself. So angels may be checked. Good angels even might be checked in their importance in light of emerging Christology. But again, I don't think it's so completely different from Jewish tradition, because already in Jewish traditions, the importance of angels vis-a-vis God is being checked. We have that at the end of Tobit in chapter 12, when finally Tobit, the father and the son, realize that the companion of Tobias was not a cousin, but was actually an angel, the angel Raphael, and he announces it to them. They are in total awe, and he tells them, not to focus on him, but to worship God. So it's possible that the angel in the narrative is aware that they could confuse him with so closely with the activity of God that they need to be reminded that it's really God who has done all of this, and not the angel who has simply been God's emissary. Just a little bit earlier in chapter 11, when Tobit's blindness is healed, what does he do in the Old Greek? He praises God and he praises the angels. So this narrative is begging for a clarification. If the angels can be worshipped sort of alongside God, then, what is their status really? And so the narrative has the angel demote himself and basically say, actually, it's all about God. And actually, the book of Revelation then, when John comes up with and falls down at the angel's feet, he is told twice in a similar way, don't worship me, worship God. So Tobit is a non-Christian Jewish document. Revelation is a Christian, I would say Jewish document, where Jesus is factored in, but still Revelation holds fast to this Jewish tradition that the angel is not to be confused with God, and then through the back door makes it very clear that the status of angels is not the same as that of Jesus, who is depicted as the Lamb and seated on the throne of God.
And I'd like to remind everybody real quick that the link to purchase The Myth of Rebellious Angels will be provided in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment just below that. And with that being said, Dr. Loren Stuckenbruck, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for your questions.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.